Okay, so we are going to be doing lesson 3.5 today, which is to complete the square to solve quadratics. So starting off with, we need to solve the following: x squared plus 2x plus 3. Now, we've done problems like this before, x squared plus 2x plus 3. Remember, our rule is that if we had an x squared and an x, the only way you can solve something if there is an x squared and an x is by factoring. Before I factor, though, I do have to make sure that this equals 0, which it does, so we're good there. So now we're just ready to start factoring. So I'm going to take 1 times 3, gives me 3, and I need to find factors of 3 that will add to give me 2. 1 plus 3 gives me 4, and there are no more factors. So I can't factor this one. Well, the good news is that after today, you guys will know how to solve these even if they are unfactorable. Okay? So what we're doing today is we're going to be going over completing the square, which is a way that we can now solve quadratics even if they are not factorable. Okay? So before we get started with that, though, we do need to talk about something called the square root property. Now, the square root property says that if x squared equals a, okay, and a is greater than 0, that just means that a is a positive number, then x would equal whatever the square root of a was. Or x would equal the negative whatever the square root of was. So basically what that's saying is that if I have this situation here where I've got an x squared equals a, I'm going to get 2 answers, which we solved one like that before on your worksheet. Okay, we had n squared minus 64. And a lot of you guys that got that n equaled 8, but then saw that there was n equals negative 8. Well, we pointed out on that, hey, that's a difference of squares. And we had to set both of those factors equal to 0. Whoops. It's going to write a plus there. Okay, so when we set them both equal to 0, we factored, we did find, oh, hey, there were 2 of them. Okay? So basically, I'm going to explain that you guys can solve those without factoring, but in order to do that, you have to be aware of what's called the square root property. And the square root property says that if you have x squared equals a, you're going to get that square root, but you also get that negative square root. A shorter version of it would be to say that x equals plus or minus the square root of a. Okay? Now, how does that even work? Well, let's look at this problem down here. We've got x squared equals 9. Okay? So let's say we don't know how to solve that, but we can fill in to make this statement true. So what squared would give me 9? Well, a 3 squared would give me 9, right? And that's the one that most people are going to point out. But is there another option that you could plug in for that squared that would still give you 9? What about if I did a negative 3 squared? Well, negative 3 times negative 3 would also give me a 9. So this situation that we created here, x squared equals 9, actually gives us 2 solutions. And we have to use the square root property to show that. So if you guys see a problem like x squared equals 9, from now on, I expect you guys to square root both sides, just like you would before. And then that's going to give me x equals not just a 3, but it gives me a positive 3 and a negative 3. Okay? So x equals plus or minus 3 would be our answer for this problem. Okay? And we're going to have to use that square root property when we are doing our completing the square. So let's go through and let's do a completing the square problem together. And then on the next video, I'm going to have 2 examples that I'll have you guys try first, and then I will also work them out so that you guys can see what you're supposed to do. So starting out, completing the square. The first thing that we have to do is we have to rewrite the equation in standard form, which is the first thing that we had to do when we were trying to factor these to solve. So my first step is I've got to make sure that it is in standard form, which is essentially just making sure that it equals 0. Okay? So if I look up here, does our equation equal 0? Yes, it does. So we're good to go on that. The next thing that you have to do, and this is unique, okay, to completing the square. But completing the square will only work if the coefficient of x squared is 1. Okay? So if I look up here, is my squared term, does it have a coefficient of 1? It does not. So since it does not have a 1 there, we need to divide every term by that leading coefficient. So in this case up here, I have to divide everything up here by 2 in order for that to work. When I do that, that gives me an n squared minus 6n plus 5 equals 0. And there we go. Okay. Now, that's how we have to do that. That's only for completing the square, that you cannot have a number in front of it. Okay? The next thing that we're going to do that is also unique, okay, is we are going to move our constant term to the right side. But when I move it over to the right side, I have to leave a space. And we're going to leave that space for something magical. So first, my constant term, that's a number without a variable, that 5 there. So I'm going to take that 5, and I'm going to subtract it to the other side. That's now going to give me an n squared minus 6n. And then I'm going to leave a space, and now I have a negative 5 on this side of the equation. Okay? Now, I told you guys that we're going to do something magical. Well, what I mean by that is we are going to find a magic number, and we're going to plug that magic number in there. So what's the point of plugging in that magic number? Well, we're going to take that magic number, and we're going to force this side of the equation here. We're going to force that to factor into an n something squared. And we're going to do that because it's going to make it easier for us to solve this equation if we do that. Okay? So the first step is how do I find my magic number? Well, there is 2 steps to finding your magic number. Okay? And these 2 steps are right here. These are our magic number steps. Okay? We will do this every single time. Okay? So the first thing that I am going to do is I am going to divide the x term by 2. Then I'm going to square the result. I'm going to divide the x term by 2, and I'm going to square the result. So my x term is a negative 6. I don't know why that says negative 10. It's a negative 6. So I'm going to take negative 6, okay, and I'm going to divide that by 2. And when I do that, my answer is negative 3. So I take my x term, this negative 6 here, negative 6, divide that by 2, that gives me negative 3. I will always divide it by 2. Now, after I divide it by 2, I am going to square the result. So I'm going to take a negative 3 squared. Whoops, wrote a 3 again. Negative 3 squared. Now, what does negative 3 squared give me? Well, that gives me 9. And folks, 9 is my magic number. Okay? 9 is that magical number that is going to help us force this thing to factor up here. Okay? So I'm going to take my magic number. See, it's all starry because it's magical. And I'm going to plug that magic number in this space that I left up there. So that is a positive 9. So I'm going to plug in a positive 9 here. Okay? Now, if I just added 9 to this side of the equation, don't I need to keep both sides balanced, right? Isn't that a rule? It is. So if I added 9 here, that does mean that I have to add 9 over here as well. Okay? So now I end up with n squared minus 6n plus 9 equals negative 5 plus 9. We have now forced this side to factor. So I've got 1 times 9. I need factors of 9 that would add to give me 6. 3 and 3 would add to give me 6, right? And they're both going to need to be negative because that's a negative there. Okay? So I don't know why I erased that, but we'd have an n squared negative 3n minus 3n plus 9. I can pull an n out of this here, which leaves me with an n minus 3. I can pull a negative 3 out here, leaves me with an n minus 3. These two match, so n minus 3 is one of my factors, and n minus 3 is my other factor. So another way that we can write n minus 3 is we could write n minus 3 as n minus 3 squared. Okay? Now, some of you guys might be like, well, why did he write that negative 3 in green there? Well, if you guys look over here, we found our magic number. Does that negative 3 show up anywhere? Shh. We're going to call that our secret number. Okay? This negative 3 is called your secret number. And that secret number, whatever you divide by 2, will always show up in these parentheses here. So rather than having you guys show all this work here, we're going to have you find your magic number. And then after you find your magic number, you automatically know it's going to factor into an n something squared. And we're just going to plug in our secret number to that spot there. Okay? Now, some of you guys are like, oh, well then why do I even need to find the magic number? Well, you have to find the magic number because you have to know what number you have to add on this side of the equation. So yes, I'm adding 9 here, and in the long run, it really doesn't matter. But I know that if I add 9 here, I also have to add 9 to that side of the equation as well. Okay? So this side here, n squared minus 6n plus 9, I found my magic number. That magic number forced it to factor into an n something squared. What is the something? Well, the something would be my secret number there. Okay? Now, on the right side of the equation, we had a negative 5 plus 9, so that gives me a 4. Okay? So I have n minus 3 squared equals 4. Okay. Now, how do I solve this here? Well, we're going to need to use our square root property. I've got n minus 3 squared, so rather than multiply that out, why don't I just take the square root of this side? Which means I have to take the square root of this side as well. So, square root of n minus 3 squared. Well, the square root and the squared are going to cancel each other. I'm left with just an n minus 3. And that's going to equal the square root of 4. Most of you guys are going to say, oh yeah, so that equals 2, which is correct. But we just talked about on the one before this, it does not equal just a 2. It equals a positive or a negative 2, a plus or minus 2. Okay, so now I have an n minus 3 equals plus or minus 2. So, plus or minus, that's a new thing, right? How do you guys handle that? That literally means that it is a plus 2 or a minus 2. So when you guys get to a plus or minus, you need to write two equations. One of them is n minus 3 equals a positive 2. And the other one is n minus 3 equals a negative 2. Okay? Because that's what plus or minus means. Plus or minus literally means a positive 2 or a negative 2. Now that I have my two equations, I'm going to solve. I'm going to add 3, add 3. When I do that, that gives me n equals 5. I'm going to add 3, and that gives me n equals 1. So my answer is n equals 1 and n equals 5. And that is how you complete the square. The next video, I'm going to show you guys how to do those next two problems on the back.